Kudos to Venezuela's first responders and all the brave citizens still pulling survivors from under the rubble. 774 buildings collapsed in last Wednesday's double earthquakes. That was the official count as of Sunday evening. The sudden pancaking of so many structures built during the boom years of high oil prices. A tipping point for an under-sanctions nation dogged by decades of eroding services and infrastructure. The interim president of a regime in survival mode was copiously booed Saturday in Caracas, as many accuse the successor of Hugo Chavez and Nicolas Maduro of putting the security apparatus before disaster relief. We'll ask how best the international community can help, with a particular eye to the dozens of U.S. forces airlifting in supplies, helping coordinate air traffic. The U.S., once the sworn enemy, and whose president claims the locals are, quote, dancing in the streets now that he removed Maduro and the oil is flowing his way. If this is truly a turning point, what kind of a turning point is it? Today in the France 24 debate, what aftermath for Venezuela? With us, Venezuelan journalist and photo reporter Sara Suarez. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Francois.
His brand new novel in French takes us back to the heroes who defy crime and corruption in the underbelly of Caracas. Vicente Olive. Schnell, you're the author of Coco Express. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
From Boston, Daniel Landsberg Rodriguez, founding partner of Aurora Macro Strategies, adjunct lecturer at Northwestern University's Kellogg School of Management. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Francois.
And he is the director of the Latin America program at the think tank Chatham House. Christopher Sabatini, thanks so much for being with us from London.
Thanks, Francois.
On the go, you can listen to the show wherever podcasts are streamed. The scramble to find survivors continues for a fifth day, and this despite the occasional aftershock, the latest this Monday, measuring 4.6 on the Richter scale. Our team in Caracas has just arrived and sent us this report.
It has now been more than 4 days since twin quakes struck Venezuela, and on this Monday morning, a 5.1 magnitude quake was felt here in the streets of the capital. As you can see behind me, those people are among the 1,000 who were living in the building in the background. Badly damaged. You can see a cracked building which has not collapsed, but the inhabitants were afraid and went homeless into the street to pass the night. They didn't receive any official help from organization or from the government. Still, they are receiving basic hygiene kits, tents from local charities, from collectives from churches, and from solidarity from neighbors. However, the help is the international relief effort is more deployed in the state of La Guaira, which is the most affected by the two quakes. And La Guaira state has been designated a disaster zone by interim president of Venezuela, Delcy Rodriguez. Now, the main objective for search and rescue teams is to retrieve dead bodies from the rubble, as up to 50,000 people are still reported missing, according to the United Nations official statements.
Maxime Pluvieux there reporting from Caracas. And there is that race to find survivors. We saw in those images, Vicente Olive Schnell, the tent on the street there behind him while he was speaking.
Yes, the damage has been very consequential to the people of Venezuela. And during 48 hours, the government really wasn't on the terrain, so we didn't really have help. So I know people that are just using their hands and shovels to try and get people out. There's been a lot of international help that is arriving, but the situation is very drastic and dire right now.
Chances of survival may be dropping, yet there are still reasons to hope, even after that 96-hour mark in the hard-hit northern port city of La Guaira. A mother and her 18-year-old baby survived for 32 hours before they were rescued from underneath the rubble. Diana Patino and her husband will have lost everything except what mattered most.
Everything I did was for my baby.
As long as he was alive, he was my driving force to stay awake and alert to everything. As long as he was alive, I was going to be alive for him. Every now and then I'd touch his little nose, and that was it was like my proof of life that he was breathing when he cried.
Sara Suarez, we're still having survivors who are being found, and as Vicente was saying, there is a little more help beginning to arrive, but of course, it's going on 5 days now.
It was unfortunately very slow the way this help arrived, and we are, of course, very thankful to all the international community to have send all these teams on the ground. But some of them were blocked for bureaucratic reasons that the government were. We still can't understand why forbidding these people to get on the ground. Other teams who were actually inside the country trying to reach Caracas and reach La Guaira, they had to try to find money on their cities. Is the case in my city, in Mérida, the Grupo Andino de Rescate, which is a rescue team specialized for 50 years of experience in these kind of situations. They tried to reach Caracas. They had to find their own money to get there. And they have this beautiful philosophy, which connects me with these images we just saw. They wrote on their social media, there is no 0 hour for miracles. And that's the philosophy that I think is bringing everybody hope and keeping them on the ground, trying to find lives still now that we have been in more than 120 hours away from this catastrophe.
Yeah, and both our panelists on set here, Daniel Landsberg Rodriguez, telling us that their immediate families are safe. I hope that's the case for you. As you again, you heard what Sara said about still believing in miracles even after all these hours.
So that's something that my family's been going through quite closely. My mother-in-law is actually one of the people who is still missing from the lab of a building called Mariana Mar in Charayave. So it's my father-in-law who was in Africa doing a Doctors Without Borders type thing, flew back, and he's essentially trying to dig her out with his hands from the ruins of the building and seeing if he can flag down one of the few international rescue groups that is active in the area. But there's a sense that it's not really being orchestrated or organized. And that's, I think, one of the repeating themes that we're seeing here. In trying to find out, if she's alive, there's a Dropbox that doctors who are active at various hospitals have put together, and they write down things there when they can, but it's not, an official process. The types of, disaster response information networks that most record-keeping societies keep are not being kept here. I think because the impulse is to control information.
And on that score, Daniel, do you corroborate what Sara was saying about the international help being laid up by the government?
I mean, absolutely. They put the entire crisis in the hands of Diosdado Cabello, who is, I think the most toxic figure in the Venezuelan government. He has a $50 million bounty on his head, lots of OFAC sanctions. He's the gatekeeper for these processes. So it's obviously a complicating factor. We've seen videos of him having a yelling match with one of the U.S. teams. We saw how the Medellin group contingent of firefighters who was sent was kept basically locked up for 12 hours before they were allowed in. These are things in which, when for people like my mother-in-law, where every moment matters, these sorts of holdups to just, feel that you control the situation are going to exacerbate a death toll that I think is probably well en route to be the highest we've seen in the hemisphere since the Haiti earthquake of 2010.
Yeah, 1,500 officially and counting. A lot of people missing. Christopher Sabatini, listening to what Daniel Landsberg Rodriguez was saying, again, he's got that personal concern with his mother-in-law, but more broadly, could it have been done differently with the regime the way it is, with the political situation the way it is? Could the aid have gotten in quicker?
First of all, we need to understand this has been a long time coming in terms of the lack of effective response. This is not just something that happened, if you will, sort of overnight. It's not just the intent of the government to maintain control over information, as Daniel said, and he's correct, but the inability of this government to respond and even coordinate that assistance, even assuming with the best of intentions, is impossible. It has underinvested in infrastructure, underinvested in first responders, underinvested in hospitals. Hospitals, even the ones that aren't damaged, are still operating really in a disabled way. It's underinvested in electricity. And if I can, well, obviously when the dust settles, we'll see all this, but I would suspect that a lot of these buildings, as you mentioned, they went up during the oil boom. I think we're going to see a lot of those cases. The basic building codes were not adhered to. There was probably corruption that basically sort of allowed people to cut some corners that made them so structurally unsound. Now, granted, there hasn't been an earthquake this large since 1900, but still, it's important to recognize the failure of this and the lack of response and the inability or even the intent to prevent the international rescue teams from getting there is really rooted in 27 years of corruption, bad management, and a system that simply was more concerned with repressing its citizens than it was with actually saving them.
Vicente Oliva-Schnell, these buildings, a lot of them, again, date back to that oil boom. It was at the time hailed because here was some social housing coming. Housing is a big issue in Venezuela, but those structures, a lot of them are the ones that are, as they say, pancaking.
Absolutely, yes. There has been a lot of corruption discovered in the way some of these buildings were made, but it's also important to underscore the fact that this is not only a crisis of mismanagement. This is a consequence of years where Chavismo has tried to control every sector of society, and we must recall that in 2024, the government passed a law making it illegal for certain NGOs to be in the country, accusing them of being spies for the United States. So in 2024, we lost many NGOs, many technicians, and many people that we need right now to be on the terrain because of the way the Chavismo acts politically.
And now they're coming in. So what happens when they come in?
Well, now they're coming in, but they're being basically stalwarted by Jose Cabello, who doesn't let people come in. There's a lot of misorganization. It's disorganized. People really don't know how to act. And the ironic part of this all is that it seems to be the North Americans, the one that are spearheading the efforts to take the people out of the rubble. More ironic yet, that part of the fleet that was used by the United States to dethrone Maduro in January is now being used to take help and food back to Caracas.
Yeah, the Americans who are helping to run air traffic control, 130 Marines expected this Monday to try to help clear the port area so more relief can come in, Sarah Suarez.
Absolutely amazing that this is them, the ones who are coming, but also to point, as Vicente was saying, on the amazing situations we're having here. We haven't heard a lot about China or Russia, the big allies from this government. They are the big absence on this tragedy, and nobody knows where they are now. They were there when they wanted all those contracts to build these apartments, to build these places without land control, without land status. There were so many contracts that we have no idea how they were handled or given to those companies from Russia, from Iran, from China. And now all these allies are completely absent. So ironically, it's the United States who decapitated this government, the ones who are coming firsthand with El Salvador and with Chile and with all these other countries that beautifully have responded to this situation. And we have to say it, Venezuela is a territory of earthquakes. We have many I don't know how you say that. Faults, sorry, in the country that activate regularly. And we have slow and little earthquakes permanently in the country. So how is it possible that never, but it's not only this government, we gotta say this, before it was the same thing. Nobody have had a policy of really thinking about us as a territory like can be done for Chile or for Japan, who has always movements on the earth, and they are prepared for this, not only on an infrastructure level, but also about protocols and having ready teams to rescue people in this kind of situation. So this is really, all this part is absolutely and 100% on the responsibility of the government, and they're not assuming this as it should be.
Daniel Landsberg Rodriguez, it's Venezuela, but it was also the case We saw it with the big earthquakes in Turkey. You have these quakes, and it's the structures that aren't prepared that collapse.
I think that that's true. And obviously, Venezuela, look, it is. Earthquakes and natural disasters have played a very big part in Venezuelan history. The first republic under Bolivar fell because of an earthquake in 1812. You have this sort of great moment where the Bishop of Caracas is standing on the ruins of the cathedral saying, this is what happens when you turn your backs on your king and your God, and the people kick Bolivar out. And then he has to go back and invade again. In 67, you had a very serious earthquake that hit Caracas, which I would say marked a generation of Venezuelan boomers as to sort of where were you that day. This shouldn't have come in as a surprise to the government. At the same time, it's not the type of thing that they've really prepared for. It would have been difficult, to be fair, to prepare for 2 earthquakes at once. The type of seismic waves that you get that will hit a structure when you have a 7.2 and less than a minute later a 7.5, sending seismic waves at slightly different angles into what's basically a sandbox in La Guaira's case and Caracas's on opposite sides of the Andes. That was always going to be difficult. But they're really, the lack of preparation for any sort of response to that has been pretty shocking. Even by Venezuelan standards. When I was in government in Venezuela, this was something that was talked about frequently. This was not a, out of left field risk. Everybody knew that it was a matter of time. There would be another earthquake, and that there haven't been any preparations, notwithstanding the, largest oil bonanza in the history of mankind having hit in the last couple of decades is very disappointing. And I think that the death count that we're going to see ultimately is going to be as much because of the lack of basic services, water, electricity, communications, disaster relief, as it is from the actual shaking, as we saw in Haiti in 2010.
In Haiti in 2010, I want to get back to Haiti later and ask about that and to make the comparison. But first, Christopher Sabatini, you can try, as our panelists said, to control everything, including the aid that's coming in. But they're not able to control people who, on Saturday, booed the interim president, Delcy Rodriguez. Is this the emperor has no clothes moment?
I think it's just the beginning of that moment, quite frankly. When the other people are discovered, hopefully alive, and let's keep in our hearts all of the inspiring pictures and messages we're seeing in stories, but we're going to find a lot more dead. And once we see that, and also see that the government's lack of coordination, lack of effective response led to many of those deaths by delaying so much. I think we have to understand that Delcy Rodriguez, we're looking at her right there. She's not an elected president. In 2024, the government under then President Nicolas Maduro flagrantly stole the election by accounts of all international election monitors. Then they basically cracked down and rounded up opponents who were peacefully protesting the stolen election. In May this year, Delcy Rodriguez, even after being made or tapped to become the interim president of Venezuela, had only 25% approval rating. This is a woman without political legitimacy, without popular support. I think we're just seeing the beginning of these fractures. I would like to believe that people can pull together and see this whole thing through and then deal with politics later. But I'm afraid that the base of a lot of this is going to be politics. It's going to drive very deep divisions in Venezuela that already exist for very legitimate reasons. And it's not beginning with, but it's certainly the most classic case is the stolen election of 2024.
Is she running the show, or is it, as you were saying, the Interior Minister, Diosdado Cabello?
Well, it depends what part. Right now, there's a split in Venezuela between the Diosdado Cabello faction and the Delcy Rodriguez faction. What she has been doing is trying to consolidate power around her instead of having this kind of a sprayed-out system that Nicolas Maduro
And yet
had.
he's in charge of the relief aid.
I'd say that Diosdado Cabello is more powerful and more dangerous for Venezuela than Delcy Rodriguez is right now.
Writing in French daily Libération, Sarah Suarez, you speak of a tragedy within a tragedy. What do you mean by that?
That we're living like in a matryoshka, these dolls where you have a doll inside the doll, inside the doll. And Venezuela is that. Venezuela is now the painful situation of a crisis that has been in our blood for the last 25 years with this government. and that is only making it worse every moment. We have had so many moments in the last years on our country going down in this crisis, and now to be hit by an earthquake of these dimensions that I fully agree no country in Latin America will be ready to face a situation like this one. Almost 2 minutes of the land moving around you. But really, this is like a big moment, and I don't think the Chavismo can survive this. This is the real test of legitimacy that Delcy Rodriguez is passing, and she is not going to survive to this test. Really, she's failing absolutely, and Diosdado is also failing. We have seen already people that are responding negatively to the presence of the policemen, to the militaries blocking the access to the firefighters who are trying to reach the crisis places, and they're not letting past the firefighter. What does it mean to see a policeman blocking the road to La Guaira and blocking the path to the access to the rescue teams? It doesn't make any sense. So I don't see how the Chavismo can survive to this situation. And what I asked in this article exactly at the end was that we can't keep being kidnapped by the geopolitical interest of Washington or of any other country. We really need a change right now. It's urgent.
Daniel Landsberg Rodriguez, Diosdado Cabello, again, it reminds us of how, from the outside, we looked at Iran at the beginning of the year, and we had people on this panel saying, oh, there's no way the regime can survive after such a bloodbath. Well, it did. In fact, in some ways, it's stronger. Do you think that the regime Chavismo is on borrowed time?
So I would sort of push back a little bit on one of the things that I believe Vicente said about. I mean, I think the relationship early on when you have the sort of not really handover, but when you have Delcy's ascension into power after Nicolas Maduro's extraction, there was this idea that Diosdado Cabello and Delcy could not. It was like the old Highlander movies. Sooner or later, they were going to have the sword fight, and there could only be one left standing. That's not the sense that I've been getting as to they seem to have gotten a pretty good working relationship going, in part because she can't really execute anything outside of Caracas. She has the legislature. She has chunks of the bureaucracy. She can sign laws. She can offer assurances, but she doesn't have the governors. She doesn't have the military. She doesn't have, various armed groups that are relevant, colectivos. The closest thing you have to someone who can operationalize remains Diosdado Cabello. So there is a certain sort of perverse logic to putting him in charge, because if this is an interior problem, if this is going to require, intense coordination with municipal governments, state governments, he would naturally be the go-to person. At the same time, there's no sense that those are the places that are really mattering. It's mostly the international community, and there he's, the most toxic figure. I think what that leads to is that sooner or later, Diosdado is probably going to end up taking a fall for this. It's a very visible role. He has made it more visible. He'd been keeping a low profile really since Maduro's extraction. Now he's, on state TV making announcements, getting photographed at sort of the cordon where they're blocking entrance to La Guaira. So he could end up being the fall person for this. And at the same time, we've had a tremendous amount, just in the past few weeks before the earthquake, you had two operations, one that cleared out mining syndicates in Bolivar State, another that neutralized one of the heads of El Tren de Aragua, in which it seemed that you had essentially direct coordination between Southcom and the FANDE, the armed forces in Venezuela, that didn't seem particularly to go through Miraflores or through the presidential palace. So I think that if you are Delcy Rodriguez, your fear is bringing in this many foreigners and having them coordinating directly with national agencies, with state governments, with civil governments, takes your sort of control as the bottleneck away. And the best way to protect that might be to put Diosdado Cabello there, who is probably the strongest thing to a workable bottleneck that the regime has left. So I think it's not going to work, but I think that the logic of having him there while it sort of may make sense in the short term, if you're worried about, people sort of skipping the presidential palace in the chain of command, could very easily backfire and facilitate. And it wouldn't be the first time that a natural disaster of magnitude ends up facilitating a democratic restoration. And given all this death, I hope that there's some silver lining can come of it.
Yeah, 24 nations so far taking part in rescue efforts. Many sending soldiers, equipment, supplies, including things like canine sniffer dogs. This from a unit from the Spanish military. Christopher Sabatini, are those sniffer dogs a threat to Chavismo?
They are, because they're showing what responsible, functioning countries can do when they anticipate and plan for disasters. So yes, those adorable sniffing dogs, they're working dogs, but they're doing the Lord's work. And as far as I know, I don't know if Venezuela has any. They've certainly not been the ones that have been pictured. We also have seen videos, by the way, of military officers, soldiers, effectively, that have been alleged to be stealing, basically looting these collapsed buildings. That makes sense too, because in part, those soldiers, especially the conscripted soldiers, are really living in poverty wages. They have been for a long time. So again, we see the problem of the response teams not just not helping, but hurting in a very negative way. The question here will be really what the Donald Trump administration wants to do. They have cited Delcy Rodriguez as their partner. We've heard him multiple times praise her as being doing a great job. And he needs to have Venezuela and the extraction of Maduro and the interim government be seen as a success, especially coming on the back of an Iran war that wasn't necessary, that has sort of, at the very least, stalled and ended without any clear conclusion. Throughout this, he cited the Venezuela model as being the successful model he wants to replicate. Now, we may see this fall off, the entire wheels of that experiment fall off much more quickly than I think they would have anyway. But obviously, with this very clear and ugly, horrendous, inhumane reminder of the incompetence of this government and the corruption of this government, it's going to be very difficult to see how Donald Trump continues to support Delcy Rodriguez. And I understand why Danielle's saying what he's saying, but I also think it would be difficult for this administration, the White House, to support Diosdado Cabello. He's under a number of indictments right now for narcotics trafficking and corruption. And again, they've gone all in on Delcy, hoping that she can control some of the more unsavory elements of the government, including Diosdado Cabello and Vladimir Padrino Lopez, now the agriculture minister. So, I think it's going to be difficult for Trump to part ways with Delcy Rodriguez. We'll have to see what the popular reaction is. But let's be honest, he's there.
All right, before we ask our panel to react to what you're saying, Christopher, let's listen to the President of the United States. This was Saturday at a Faith and Freedom Coalition conference in Washington.
They're making more money than they've ever done. They've never made the money that they're making now. And it's really, outside of what happened last night with that was terrible what happened. It was a big earthquake, knocked down buildings. But outside, it was really, it's a happy country again. The people are happy. They're dancing in the streets. The people running it are doing a very good job.
The people running it are doing a very good job. Vicente Olive, when you hear that clip, what view do you have towards, because Sarah was mentioning it earlier at the beginning of our conversation, the fact that here's the U.S. military helping run air traffic control right now.
Yes, it's very bizarre coming from a Venezuelan perspective. But the problem with Venezuela is also that there's a complete institutional collapse. So we can't trust our institutions anymore, and we're seeing that in all the images that we have.
But if Washington has this government's back, does it have its back? Listening to Donald Trump say the people there are doing a very good job, it sounds like it.
Well, it would seem so, but it would be good if actually the United States were the ones that were taking care of this problem. If you contrast that with Hurricane Katrina, when George W. Bush was there, the problem with him was that people were saying that the militaries didn't arrive in time. Here, the problem is that people don't want the military and don't want the police to be there. They want the police and the military to not be there so they can access the people and give them help. So it's completely opposite of what you see in a country where you believe in the institutions and you have support from that part.
Sorry, Suarez.
I believe this romance that they've been having can stay for a long time because at a certain point, this is going to harm Donald Trump. And these declarations he was making, that this was obscene to hear that right now in the moments that we are living, actually. But I think this can't last for a long time. And there is another point very important here about the fact that he can or not keep supporting Delcy Rodriguez in power is that Maria Corina Machado was announcing that probably she wants to go back to Venezuela, and right now could be this turning point. So now there's going to be, in the coming days, a new balance on things. And I believe that Washington is going to reconsider who really is more useful to their wellness and keep pumping our oil or not. And I don't think Delcy Rodriguez is gonna fill that job anymore, as they were until now working pretty well together for them, not for the people from Venezuela. So what is going to mean this possible return from Maria Corina Machado to Venezuela? That could be a turning point to all this situation.
If she returns, Daniel Landsberg Rodriguez, you got to wonder what people in the state of Florida, where there's a large Venezuelan community, and where their current Secretary of State hails from, Marco Rubio, what they thought of listening to that clip of Trump claiming that people are dancing in the streets. Is it more about the oil or about democracy with Trump?
I mean, it depends on the day, and it depends on what the most recent conversations he's had seem to be. Look, oil is something that is very easy to sell to the MAGA base as a win. It affects gas prices. It is probably more important to the midterms than anything that could happen in foreign policy. The American government has a very real opportunity here because they have billions of dollars of Venezuelan oil rents that are essentially locked up. So they could actually, they could reroute some of that in theory and, be very generous to Venezuela for rebuilding with Venezuela's own money. On top of that, it looks like, and it's still early, there may have been some disruption at the two major ports, Puerto Cabello and La Guaira, but in terms of the actual oil infrastructure, it looks like most of the major refineries can be brought back online relatively quickly. Some of them have already come back online. So in terms of sort of that element, you could get, recovery relatively quickly. That said, what's the electric grid? The roads, obviously the buildings, structures, bridges, that's going to be much slower, take much longer. And I think it's a real opportunity for the U.S., which has sort of built this greater MAGAM sphere around itself now with the recent elections in Peru and Colombia and Chile, of sort of right-wing, kind of anti-establishment leadership, of sort of showing, a more generous U.S. hand, a little bit like they did with Milei in the midterms, except this time you could do it with the Venezuelans' own money, which, seems like sort of a very Trumpian way to get a win without having to necessarily pay for it. So I'm bullish that, there will be significant support, and hopefully that support, I think, in terms of process as well as in terms of outcome, might facilitate the, end of this regime. At the same time, if you're Delcy Rodriguez, this is going to be, you're going to try and use this as an excuse for not having elections right now.
And Christopher
You're going to be
Sabatini,
calling Marco Rubio, you're going to be calling Trump and saying, we can't have elections, there's no electricity, you can't drive anywhere, we need another year, we need another 18 months. And, that's going to be a difficult conversation.
and if you're Christopher Sabatini, if you're Marco Rubio, what are you whispering into Donald Trump's ear right now, especially since Mr. Rubio wants to be president in 2 years' time?
Marco Rubio's played this very well so far. He's, gone along with the Trump plan, but he's been sending signals and using words that Trump hasn't been using himself. He's talked about transition after the recovery stage and stabilization stages. I think right now what he's saying is maybe it's time to start to seek a way that begins the process of holding elections, because Trump is, if he's willing to listen to Marco Rubio, Trump is facing a difficult turn right now, because basically without any long-term possibilities of changing the government, of having citizens express their popular will, that frustration, that anger even will become more pent up and will likely manifest itself in ways that Donald Trump doesn't like. That looks like it's a very unstable situation that he's created in Venezuela. So if I were Marco Rubio right now, I'd be telling Donald Trump, you know what, let's start to work with the government. Let's set up a timeline for elections. Let's start the process of reform, because this government, with, you know, even though that may take some time, the truth is people need to have some hope that they will get to choose their own leaders, and some hope they can punish the leaders that are responsible for the deaths of friends and family.
All right, we saw those images of Marco Rubio, currently who's most recently been in Bahrain. Again, we've been talking with our panel about this double earthquake last Wednesday, the aftershocks. It's been more than a quarter century since another major tragedy hit Venezuela. This was 1999, the so-called Vargas tragedy, mudslides in what is now the same La Guaira state. That's the epicenter of the earthquakes. Tens of thousands were killed there, up to 10% of that state's population. We don't know exactly what the final death toll was. Vicente Uribe, were there lessons learned? How will that tragedy, how did that one change? You heard earlier Daniel Landsberg Rodriguez saying sometimes natural disasters change politics in Venezuela. Did that one change politics?
For me personally, it was a litmus test. At the time, I wasn't really enthusiastic for Chavismo, but when that happened, they had international experts, Venezuelans, that went to Japan, for example, and came back with these great plans about how to build and avoid these kind of catastrophes. And I thought, if the government manages to do this, then I will back them inconsequentially, because it was really a great program that they established. It was abandoned after a couple of years. Nothing was done. So it's very difficult to see how we can actually, because the problem with Venezuela is actually thinking forward. We can do things now, we're very good at reacting, but when it's on the long run, when it's a marathon, that's when things get kind of lost.
And the Vargas tragedy, did it change Venezuela?
I don't think it changed Venezuela. It was a very sad moment. I was at the airport right the day before they closed it, and I remember coming back to my city, and when I landed, I saw the news, and it was really impressive. And all the country reacted the same way we are reacting now, with solidarity and trying to get together to put together food and send all these supplies to the ground. But really, when we see that other buildings were built on the same places that were already destroyed by this tragedy in 1999, we can conclude that we didn't learn our lessons from that experience. And another point that happened in 99 and also now is going to be even worse probably, and we haven't mentioned here, is the fact that people are probably going to start leaving the country again. Is there going to be another wave of diaspora? People going to start leaving the country? The United Nations pointed that maybe 6.8 million of Venezuelans are being hit by this tragedy. So are there going to be also these consequences? And this has to be also taken into account by Washington, whether they decide to stay in this romantic relationship with Delcy Rodriguez, or they decide to activate really a change and a real transition to get a country that can rebuild itself and go back to be a competitive, autonomous, and that people can come back and not keep flying away from our country.
Daniel Landsberg Rodriguez, again, you look back at 1999. We talked earlier in the conversation about 2010 and the earthquake in Haiti, where there was this big rush of international solidarity. But then afterwards, it all kind of led to a country that still hasn't been rebuilt. For Venezuela, do you see the U.S. and others in the international community stepping up in this instance?
So yes, and you know, I think that 99 has two really important lessons. That the first is, so my wife was in La Guaira in 1999. She was evacuated from the roof of her building by helicopter and sent to a stadium in Caracas, where she was processed by the government. where there were different places that she could be sent to. So in a sense, the difference between 1999 and now is a very good depiction of just how far Venezuela has fallen in terms of its state capacity. Chavez very controversially turned away foreign assistance in 99. Many people, including my wife, never forgave him for that. But there was a country around La Guaira still that had some capability to respond. And there were people like her who were saved. We're not seeing that this time. And Delcy Rodriguez does not have the luxury of being able to turn away anyone. Even El Salvador or, let alone the U.S., you are getting promises from Nicaragua, Iran. It has to be all comers because of how weak the state has become under 25 years of Bolivarian revolution. So I think that's lesson number one. Lesson number two is a more practical one. This sediment or this earthquake could have shaken up a lot of sediment. And last time in 1999, it took very heavy rainfalls through most of December to knock enough sediment out that it created the mudslides that, as you said, killed 30,000 people. Right now, a lot of that sediment might have been shaken loose by the earthquake itself, which means that you wouldn't necessarily need as much rain to get another tragedy on top of the tragedy that we're already living. And I think if I were the authorities in Venezuela, that's what I would be most concerned with. It's something that, you really need to accelerate this process. You have an El Nino coming in. Those are usually dry in Venezuela, but not always. And heavy rainfall on this could, create a situation where the tens of thousands that'll probably die from these two earthquakes could get much, much larger.
Yeah, Sarah, as far as you were concerned, looking at the images of the rain falling over the weekend.
Absolutely. When you see the meteo in La Guaira, there's going to start raining this week. And there is already some episodes of rivers who are falling out of their coast in Portuguese state, which is not so far, is in the center of the city, of the country, I'm sorry. So, yeah, this is a big concern because we already left the golden window where we were supposed to find lives, and as I mentioned in the beginning of the show, there is still hope, and we still have to believe that there is life that can be saved. But if the rains start coming, this is going to really complicate even more this situation that has already been absurd from all point of view.
Vicente Olives, now you mentioned on your socials charities that you support. It's difficult for viewers to know where to turn.
Yes. It's important to know where you're helping and what you're trying to do to help. There has been, unfortunately, stories of help that is stolen by government officials. It's very important to give to societies and organizations that that are right. I put them on my socials. Some of them are Caritas Venezuela, for example, is always very good. There's I'd have to look it up, but there's very ways that you can contribute and support our country right now. That's the thing that we need the most right now, is really support from the people to be able to finalize this part where we're going to try to see how many people were died and what the conditions of the infrastructure are, and then we can look forward. But right now, it's very important to be able to support the people of Venezuela.
All right, and our thoughts, of course, are with all those that are still searching out loved ones like Daniel Landsberg Rodriguez. Sarai Suarez, I want to thank you. I want to thank as well Vicente Olives Schnell, Daniel Landsberg Rodriguez for being with us from Boston, Christopher Sabatini in London. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.
Thank you.